Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York.
Richard III. I just don't believe someone would be that wicked because of a disability. Doesn't ring true to me.
That's your critique of Shakespeare, is it? Doesn't ring true.
We both know you've had issues.
I suffer from chronic fatigue, and yet have I ever missed a deadline?
I thought it was time to give the younger ones a chance to shine.
Well, you want people are good at being under 40, I will admit I am struggling there, but so are you.
Don't do anything impetuous, that's all I ask. We need your wages too.
Bye, Mom. Bye, Mom. Bye. Do you have any books on Richard III, the King?
I know who you mean. We have 8 titles.
I'll take them.
Which ones?
All of them.
You haven't answered our calls. You haven't answered our texts. What have you been doing?
You must be the Richard III Society. I'd like to join. I'd like to visit his grave.
There isn't one.
His mortal remains are lost to history.
I know I can find him.
You're starting to sound slightly mad.
If you could just understand the way it's made me feel. I feel energized. I feel happy. I know you're some sort of apparition. I've been trying to work out why you're here. I wonder if it's because you're lost.
How can you possibly find him on your own?
Finding a needle in a haystack would be easier.
This is starting to look a bit like an unhealthy obsession.
Plenty have tried to find him and failed.
And I know you haven't been in work for the last 2 weeks.
Can you tell me what that letter represents?
Just means reserved.
Of course. I believe this is a very important historical site.
This is the equivalent of someone with a homemade rocket saying they're going to reach the moon.
You can't stop now.
Have faith in your research. Have faith in yourself.
I'm worried I won't find you.
Don't let them push you around. Stay strong.
I'm here today to tell you a story about a person who is judged unfairly in life and never given the opportunity to show their true potential. You don't happen to know where you are, do you? Might help.
Hello there, Richard the Film Geek here, and I'm here to give you guys my review/rant of the 2022 British biographical comedy The Lost King, which was released around the time everyone here in the UK bade farewell to the previous monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, was adapted from the 2013 Philippa Langley and Michael Jones non-fiction book, The King's Grave, The Search for Richard III, by Steve Coogan and Jeff Pope, who both previously worked together on Philomena, was directed by Stephen Frears and stars Sally Hawkins, Steve Coogan, Harry Lloyd, aka Jeremy Baines, from the Doctor Who Series 3 two-parter Human Nature / The Family of Blood, Mark Addy and Lee Ingleby. The story of the Lost King is, of course, a very loose, feature-length dramatisation of the remarkable true story of what was considered at the time to be one of the greatest archaeological digs so far this century, namely the historic discovery spearheaded by Philippa Langley in the late summer of 2012 underneath the Leicester car park of the remains of King Richard III, who up to this point was very infamously demonised and vilified both by Tudor-era propagandists like Sir Thomas More and, of course, most famously by William Shakespeare himself as the villainous tyrannical usurper with a hunchback and a withered hand, and potential partial inspiration for Scar from The Lion King, who was purportedly said to have cruelly murdered both of his young nephews in the Tower of London in order to take the crown of England for himself, only to then himself be killed in the Battle of Bosworth Field 2 years later by his successor Henry Tudor, aka the future Henry VII. In this movie, we basically follow a mostly highly fictionalized version of Philippa Langley, as portrayed here by Sally Hawkins, who suffers from ME, or chronic fatigue, still lives with her ex-husband John, despite the breakdown of their marriage, as well as their 2 teenage sons, is belligerently snubbed for a promotion at the telecommunications company where she works, and thus feels physically inadequate, neglected, sidelined, and not really taken as seriously as she wants to. Only after going out one night with her eldest son to see a stage production of the Shakespeare play Richard III does she not only become convinced that this iconic portrayal of the king might not after all be insanely accurate to who the real Richard III was, but also develops kind of a personal kindred spirit with the king through her increasingly bizarre encounters with a ghostly apparition of him that I do believe is supposedly meant to be a perfect representation of really whatever the hell's going on in Philippa's head. Thus, she becomes self-motivated and determined to prove the stuffy higher-ups of Leicester University wrong by campaigning for a full-scale public excavation in a reserved car park of Richard's remains to be carried out in order to both give her a sense of purpose and make a personal difference in the world, as well as to finally clear the king's once bad name once and for all. So, now that I've recently rewatched this movie for really technically the second, and let's be honest, final time, here are my thoughts on The Lost King. Oh boy, was this yet another crushing disappointment. which really sucks and is such a shame for me to say, because I genuinely wanted to get behind this movie. The potential was actually there for this one to get me emotionally invested in its story, as well as to get me to understand a bit more what exactly made the discovery of King Richard III's remains just over 13 years ago such a monumental, game-changing achievement, not just in archaeological history, but also British regal history in general. But alas, I feel that likewise with Woman in Gold as a more recent example, this film just manages to completely squander that potential in favour of yet another by-the-numbers, cookie-cutter underdog story that somehow manages to be even duller and more stunningly boring. Plus, you can obviously tell that this has all the hallmarks and all the trappings of a made-for-television movie produced by the BBC that somehow managed to get a theatrical release as opposed to just being shown on TV or gone straight to a streaming service like Netflix. And that thus this is just yet another pretentious as hell production that does not look in any way cinematic, grand, or especially epic as it only seems to believe it is. The opening credits to this movie were actually literally the very first red flag for this movie that made me think, oh dear, this does not look good. I mean, they're literally not really trying to hide the fact that these opening credits are just such an obviously blatant rip-off and or pastiche of the masterful opening titles to Psycho, just even down to the composition. The acting at best is just okay for the most part, with the remote standout at least being Sally Hawkins, but only just because she is the only actor within this cast who is legitimately trying here to give as good a performance as she can. As for the rest of the cast, Harry Lloyd, Mark Addy, and especially Lee Ingleby and Steve Coogan, they're either just there in the background and or completely underutilized in their roles. Stephen Frears' direction here, shockingly non-existent. And yet I honestly don't even know what the hell happened. I really don't know if he either completely lost control of the production or genuinely didn't understand what he was trying to say here. But whatever the case, his directorial vision just seemed to be really sorely lacking here. And don't even get me started on Alexander Desplat's score here. I mean, on the one hand, I do sort of get that he was trying to make this movie sound majestic, grand, and epic, almost reminiscent in a way of the 1955 Richard III film with Laurence Olivier, as you can see right here. But on the other hand, he really needed to use a much more similarly restrained, subdued, and understated score more to that he did for the King's Speech, because here it sounds way too much like some of the scores he used for Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Parts 1 and 2. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but in my honest opinion, it just doesn't sound at all appropriate for what supposedly is a much more self-contained and small-scale production. Plus, no real wonder the BBC recently got themselves into hot water over their simplistic portrayal of Richard Taylor, who at the time was one of the leading archaeologists within Leicester University, and of course, thankfully, not the Academy Award-winning costume designer for The Lord of the Rings, as this stereotypically patronising and kind of misogynistic moustache-twirling pantomime villain. I mean, granted, poor Lee Ingleby is not at fault for this, but fucking come on. Talk about a more blatantly slanderous, insultingly insensitive, and crassly obscene character assassination, let alone a portrayal that completely lacks any nuance, complexity, or subtlety whatsoever. I mean, effing for real, guys. In conclusion, there's surprisingly nothing really that much else I can say about The Lost King, other than it at least had the potential to be a decent or even a good movie, especially given the richness of the material that it was working with. But alas, instead, it shoots itself in the foot, completely drops the ball, and ultimately commits the exact same cardinal sin that Henry VII committed over 510 years ago to slander his predecessor's reputation, as we all know. If you're really into your history and you remotely happen to like this movie more than I do, more power to you. But otherwise, I'd rather recommend that you go and check out the Channel 4 documentary, Richard III, King in the Car Park, a link for which I will very kindly leave in the description, by the way. It's just over an hour and 13 minutes long, and I guarantee you'll have a much better historical insight into the uncovering of the Richard III myth than you will ever have within an hour and a half of this frankly dull and boring, blandly written, and just near slanderous rubbish. And honestly, with all that being said, my overall rating for The Lost King is going to be, at best, 1 out of 10. Now, don't forget to do the following few things as always. Leave a comment below, let me know your thoughts on The Lost King, subscribe to my channel, click on the little bell to receive any emailed notifications and or updates from the channel. If you haven't already, you can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd and Blue Sky. Do take care, everyone, and bye.